everyone. Welcome to our briefing. Jonathan Keemer will present our first topic today. Jonathan is a senior intelligence manager at WorldAware, analyzing threats across Europe and Russia. He's worked in the travel security sector for more than a decade and has a master's degree in WMD proliferation and international security from King's College London, as well as a BSc in economics. Presenting with Jonathan is Terence Chaplet. Terence is based in Paris and has expertise in terrorism and European security. He has a master's in international security from the University of Sussex, as well as a bachelor's degree in criminology and sociology from the University of South Wales. I'm now going to hand it back to Jonathan, who's going to get us started with the discussion of how Brexit and the COVID-19 pandemic are impacting the UK economy. Jonathan?
Thanks, Mary. The Brexit transition period, which cushioned the business and transportation impacts of the UK's departure from the EU on January the 31st last year, ended on December the 31st. And while the agreement on the future relationship reached on Christmas Eve mitigated the possibility of significant short-term disruption, including at ports of entry and exit between the UK and the EU, increased friction is inevitable, which will likely have economic ramifications in the longer term. With the British economy already reeling from the impact of coronavirus restrictions on movement and business activity, a prolonged period of private sector stagnation and public sector austerity is highly likely, which will have a high potential of leading to a general, though not overly significant, deterioration in the security environment through 2021. The agreement that they've reached is based on a tariff and quota-free free trade area, alongside visa-free travel and continued cooperation on legal and policing matters. Membership of the EU provided the UK with frictionless trade with the EU single market, which of course included EFTA states such as Norway and Iceland as well. However, having left the single market, even with the free trade agreement, non-tariff barriers to trade, such as additional customs and quality inspections, extra paperwork, and different tax regimes will now apply. The whole Brexit negotiation process was complicated by the common travel area between the UK and Ireland, particularly their shared border, which predated the membership of the EU membership of either country. And the solution has been to consider Northern Ireland part of the EU customs territory, with non-tariff barriers now applying between the province and mainland UK, but not applying between Ireland and Northern Ireland. The most noticeable Brexit travel issue so far has been that the UK is no longer considered a Schengen associated state, and this means that EU COVID measures that enabled preferential treatment for arrivals from Ireland, Norway or Andorra, for example, no longer apply to the UK. So the UK faces the same COVID related travel restrictions as, say, the US or Canada or Russia. So access procedures are now based entirely on epidemiological assessments of the situation here, as opposed to without any sort of preferential treatment coming from membership of the EU. So Brexit has been indirectly responsible for increased COVID restrictions. Otherwise, ongoing trade and cooperation has meant that trade flows between the UK and the EU have not been significantly impacted so far. Of course, blanket restrictions on travel from the UK into France over the new year due to the identification of a new strain of COVID, as well as the lower traveller footprint at this present time due to the pandemic, may have helped mask some of the friction that might otherwise have manifested. The immediate and short impacts of the end of the Brexit transition period has been pretty minimal. The problem is, and this is something that we've been saying for several years, the impact is going to be slow burn. But slow burn economic deterioration doesn't sell many papers. There have been a lot of high profile stories on issues such as ham sandwiches being confiscated from truckers entering the Netherlands from the UK, for example, which is additional friction for sure, but it's not cripplingly so. We've also seen newspaper reports illustrating the additional administrative burden on UK exports being illustrated by chaotic scenes of truck gridlock at Dover. These photographs are nothing to do with the admin burden, but as tend to be more to do with strikes on the French customs union workers last year. But the media have been trying to sort of spin this general immediate impact story. But there is a genuine point to be made with this when talking about the additional administrative burden. Some sectors, so the car manufacturing industry, for example, will be relatively insulated, but other sectors, so those with necessarily higher regulatory regimes in place, so livestock, products of animal origin, foodstuffs, these are good examples. Companies in these areas some of them are judging that the new administrative costs of exporting to the EU are prohibitive. And the impact of this hasn't been immediately apparent, but at present, most of the trucks leaving the UK and entering the EU are currently empty. Now, empty trucks heading into the EU are not necessarily unusual. In normal times, the UK imports more from the EU than it exports to the EU. So there will always be sort of empty trucks heading in one direction to balance out the freight capacity and to pick up the slack sort of on the other side of the channel. But the problem is, at the moment, the number of empty trucks heading over to the EU are twice as many, at least, as the usual numbers, which illustrates that the current impact on UK exports as a proportion of general cross-channel trade is high, or is growing. So this is probably not entirely down to Brexit, but Brexit is certainly likely to be a contributing factor. And we expect that going forward, companies in some sectors on both sides of the channel will begin to readjust supply chains and seek alternative suppliers and markets, downgrading reliance on cross-channel trade. And sourcing alternative suppliers is likely to come quicker than sourcing alternative markets, and so this is likely to involve an economic hit as time goes on. So in addition to the contraction of likely export markets, the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic and its related restrictions on business activity will continue to exacerbate the economic challenges through 2021. The British economy was 8.6% smaller in Q3 of 2020 than it was at the beginning of the year. Some estimates say that there are approximately 250,000 small firms in the UK that are at risk of going under. And the UK government has so far spent more than £300 billion on stimulus measures and now has debt of over £2 trillion for the first time. Unemployment in the UK has risen sharply, and more than 9 million people have been furloughed as part of the government's job retention scheme. This has an estimated cost to the government of £14 billion. That's US dollars 18 billion. And falling public revenues, coupled with a massive exponential increase in the welfare budget, will almost certainly lead to unpopular austerity cuts. Household incomes are likely to deteriorate further when the government's furlough scheme ends. It's currently scheduled to end in April the 30th. It has been extended a couple of times. It's probably not going to be extended again. And people are likely to be made redundant when it does end, when it becomes apparent that their jobs have gone permanently. So the return of austerity, coupled with diminishing public resources for the police, say, is likely to affect the domestic security environment. And we saw this following the financial crash of 2008, when public sector cuts led to the development of an established anti-austerity movement and nearly a decade of mass protests, some of which attracted an estimated 250,000 participants. Now, unemployment and financial hardship tend to disproportionately affect younger workers, school leavers, university leavers, and these typically represent those age groups most likely to involve themselves in civil unrest. A resurgence in the anti-austerity cause could merge with other existing protest movements, so anti-lockdown movements, environmentalists, anti-racism groups, and likely increased social and political polarization during economic hardship could also encourage growing support for issues such as Scottish independence and anti-immigration movements, which would have the significant potential to attract adversarial counter demonstrations. And of course, if you get two opposing demonstrations happening in proximity, you're far more likely to get disruptive effects of police and security movement restrictions in the vicinity, or at worst, you could get violence between rival activists. Economic hardship can also increase criminal activity, particularly in the case of burglaries and property theft, and they can also drive perceived marginalised individuals towards extremism. Authorities in the UK and in other parts of Western Europe have already warned of a rapidly increasing threat from right-wing terrorists who identify as economically disadvantaged due to mass immigration, for example. In addition, in the UK, Northern Ireland, we might see economic frustration exacerbating sectarian tensions and encouraging a resurgence in militant activity by dissident Republican groups. Strong opposition to the de facto separation of Northern Ireland from the UK customs territory could likewise encourage and increase activity by loyalist paramilitary groups. And we've seen hints of this in recent days with customs staff at Belfast and Larne ports in Northern Ireland being withdrawn and security at those facilities bolstered following apparent threats from loyalist groups who were opposed to the additional barriers being imposed between Northern Ireland and the rest of the UK. So far, this has been a very UK-centric briefing, but of course, Brexit and COVID travel restrictions are going to have an impact on the other side of the channel too. So I'll just briefly hand over to my colleague, Terence Chapelet, who's based in Paris, and he can give us an outline of the likely medium-term impact over there.
Hello, everyone, and thanks, Jonathan. As you said, the short-term effects of Brexit have so far been muted on the French side. As you mentioned, the UK is currently implementing custom changes throughout the years, meaning that EU exporters are less likely to be disrupted than their UK counterparts. However, aside from the additional COVID-19 movement barriers applying to the UK as a non-Schengen associated state, the most visible impact of Brexit on this side of the channel is likely to be an increase in industrial action, as unions already condemn the increase in workload and work out to demand additional resources, higher paid, and better working conditions. As a reminder, France has one of the lowest rates of unionization in Europe at around 10% of employees. By comparison, the number reaches around 25 in the UK and up to 82% in Iceland. But unions are much more present in more than half of French companies, and under French law, elected union delegates represent all employees, union members or not, in firms with over 50 employees. They therefore remain influential and can be very disruptive, notably through action on the transportation networks, as those present in France may have noticed in the past. Interestingly, though, we have observed a trend of decreasing union influence during protests by the Yellow Vest or Gilets Jaunes movement in recent years, which were exclusively citizen-driven, independent of centralized leadership, with a clear breach from unions and even political parties. This, however, appeared to be to have been just temporary, as they quickly regain influence, and during the pension reform strikes back in 2019, as they were leading the most destructive actions on the transportation networks, and we have not seen such protracted strikes since 1995. And this all demonstrates the unions retain the potential to cause significant disruption if they deem it necessary, alongside likely austerity measures on the side of the channel 2 due to COVID and related restrictions. There is a strong chance, therefore, that unions will seek to leverage issues raised by Brexit or COVID through industrial action, We've seen, for example, drivers being inconvenienced by mandatory testing requirements and limit placed on refreshments, which must currently close at 6 due to COVID, 6 p.m. And also confusion over post-Brexit bureaucracy. Some drivers that had to remain at the port of exit for days, waiting for the correct paperwork clearance to come through. And recently, we saw 5 of the biggest unions representing French hauliers. French hauliers that called for strike actions, but that have been averted for now. However, the form of any future and likely industrial action by this trucker will include blockades of the main ports, Calais, Le Havre, Opération Escargot or Go Slow convoys similar to the one pictured here on major roads throughout the country, but also possibly in city centers to be as disruptive as possible. This kind of action could also involve strikes from maritime workers, Eurostar employees. Eurostar currently facing huge economic difficulties, aviation staff, and representatives of the fishing industry. We could also see grève de zèle or work to roll actions at international airports or on the Eurostar, for example, as well as protests near the affected industries or relevant public buildings or ministries. And to finish on that, we believe such actions are likely to become much more visible throughout the coming year.
Thanks, Terence. So in conclusion, Brexit and COVID are in themselves not likely to lead to a deterioration in the security environment, but together the consequent economic hit means that they're likely to be indirectly responsible for a modest increase in insecurity arising from civil unrest, increasing criminal activity, and possibly an increase in terrorist attacks from groups and individuals that see themselves as marginalised. On the French side, we could see motivations for increased union-led activism and disruptive industrial action, particularly in the transport industry. And while these developments are highly unlikely to present a fundamental change in the threat businesses operating in the UK and in the EU face, it is something that will likely generate headlines and growing resultant concern as the year progresses.